All right, Jeff. Today I am throwing at you another last minute podcast. I like to keep you on your toes that way.
Yep.
And but on the flip side, what I'm balancing that with is the fact that we are using your data matrix, and I'm gonna probably need you to explain that since it's your thing, and that's what we're going to talk about. Data analytics, etc. Go ahead.
Sure. You said like go. Is that like a just go? Good luck. All right. So I'm gonna.
do you need like a? Do you want to? I can give you a formal invitation, Jeff.
Yeah, that's okay.
You're cordially invited to just.
So let me start by just describing the matrix a little bit. So on the horizontal axis there, you've got that red line there. You've got analytical readiness, and then the black line is data maturity. So data maturity, I think people are pretty familiar with. This is like, is your data quality good? Is it available? Like, does it actually exist? Is it accessible? Is it set up well? Do you have is your data, is your quality good? All that kind of stuff. Analytical readiness is more of a human question, which is the organization, do they understand how to use data? Do they understand how it should be leveraged? Are they excited about using data, or are they just kind of like, yeah, we just want to do it the way we've always done it. This is just a waste of time or whatever. That's what analytical readiness is about.
In your experience and people you've talked to, your clients, etc., are people, who wants to move to the upper right-hand quadrant? I mean, who in an organization cares about this thing?
I think it's a little bit tricky to answer that question because I think what people want is the results of having moved to the upper quadrant, as opposed to like,
as long as it's free, that's what
data people are sitting here like, I don't understand why the business people aren't using my data. And the business people are like, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do with this data. But everybody's kind of annoyed with everyone else because they're kind of like, so I don't know. I don't know I have this guess. I don't know if this is true, but I believe that many, many companies, if not most companies, are in that bottom box that I called ad hoc. And this is basically where you have low data maturity and low analytical readiness, and they sort of feed off of each other. So the first thing is, if you have low data maturity, like your data quality is not that good, so the data's not your data's not very available, it's not very accessible, whatever it is, and so you're basically in this position where you're like, with the business people are basically in this position like, this data is crap, I can't use it, I'm going to do something else. Mm-hmm. And so then they're like, well, I don't really care about data because it's not all that useful. And so then nobody's driving to say, like, let's fix the data. And the data people are just frustrated because essentially now they are underfunded, understaffed. They can't really fix the problems. And so it's just self-perpetuating. So that's kind of the ad hoc bucket. I do think you then sometimes find companies that are sort of in that top left bucket, which is you actually have, because somebody was like, had the foresight, usually the CIO or the CEO or something like whatever, the foresight to like, we're going to invest in data professionals who know what they're doing. We're going to put in a Snowflake data warehouse, whatever it is. And they end up with like this sort of like state of the art data maturity situation, yeah. But the organization is still reacting to data the same way they did when they were in the ad hoc bucket. So from an analytical readiness perspective, in other words, they're kind of like, yeah, but we know how to do this. We do this all the time. My instinct and gut is better than what you think. And so you introduce a bunch of like really annoyed data professionals.
I mean, I'm feeling for these people because that's probably somebody who's put a lot of work and effort, and basically the organization is telling them, this is kind of useless, so that's nice. Why did we hire you again? And actually, It's not really their fault in that quadrant.
Right. The other thing I think that happens in that bucket is you get the situations where, yes, there's some realization about the data, but nobody wants to sort of move forward because they're sitting there like, well, just give me a better, I think what at least what I've seen is the business people start to basically say to the data people, just give me this information. Just give me the data that I'm asking for. As opposed
now you're asking an IT person to be a business analyst.
Right.
That's
and right. And they don't, they feel like data just should magically appear in the form that they need it, and so what they get is whatever they asked for instead of what they really needed. So
there's no flex. So in that quadrant, do you feel like it's more like a inflexible, like you can't actually do any kind of basic mining of the data because you've asked the things you can get are very.
It's a little bit. I sometimes use this analogy in that bucket. As the analogy I use is like, let's say you had a group of, finance people, and they've been using abacuses for the last, 1,000 years or whatever, however long the abacus has been around, and suddenly you come in with a calculator and you're like, I have come up with a better tool to do your job, and they're like, oh, this is great. And then they start doing 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 instead of using the fact that they can.
I have to stop and tell you a story because that reminds me of a kind of funny story. Like this was years, like decades ago, but I'm in the sciences, but there was this PhD level scientist who was using Excel spreadsheets, exactly what you just described, where he literally would type all the numbers in to a column and then get a calculator out, add them all together, and divide by n to get the average.
Right, exactly. Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's like this. It's like there are these amazing tools. The data folks, the analytics folks know that they exist. They know that they can do them, and what they're getting is, I just need a digital abacus. That's kind of where we are. So.
So is it like do you need to educate your non-technical users as much as you need to educate your technical, data people?
Yeah, maybe even more so. I think. I mean, so in the box there on the diagram, I say invest in change management. That's what I'm talking about. You have to invest in educating people about how analytics can help them do their job, as opposed to educating the data folks on how analytics works or whatever. I mean, yes, I suppose, like, to some extent, you're always going to have situations where you need to educate your data folks, but typically the data folks know what to do, or at least they understand it, unless they've been sort of stuck in the same role since since dawn of time, whatever. They've just been around since the abacus, right? So, but I think so most of the time, I think in that what I called resistant bucket is you need to re-educate the organization about what's possible, because to some extent, I think, well, most of the time when you end up in the resistant bucket, what happens is you started out in the ad hoc bucket, and suddenly the data folks and the analytics folks got a lot better.
Yeah.
So they basically started to move the organization in the right direction, and instead of people going, yay, this is cool, they're like, why did you move my cheese? Sort of situation. So
can you go into the bottom right hand bucket? Like, Can you give an example? What does that organization look like? That seems, at least from like my quick read of it, that seems like the rarest case, but is it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what that would look like, I think it exists out there. I think what that would look like is, this is a bucket where you're like, suddenly your leadership, either because they're new leadership or they've suddenly learned something, probably because their new leadership has come in to the organization, say a new CEO, new CFO, new CIO, and they go, there's a better way to do this.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're really talking about. And they start to say, okay, well, the problem with doing it really well is we don't have the right talent or the right knowledge or the right capabilities on our team, probably less because the people that they have aren't good, but that the people that they have are they're understaffed, so and so the result of that is B, that all they can ever do is firefight, right? Like data problem, and they jump from problem to problem, and they never really actually get to the real stuff, which is, how do I create decision tools and analytical capabilities that the organization could use? So I do think there are a lot of companies out there where there is a sense of yes, there's a better way to do this, but they just need to invest in people, or they need to get, sometimes actually it's not even so much investing in new like full-time people as much as going out. There's lots of great companies out there that you can hire that will come in and bring a team in and basically build all these structures and dashboards and whatever machine learning forecast of whatever it is that you need. You just need to have somebody who actually has a vision of where you're going, because otherwise who knows what they're going to
This
build.
is like one thing that comes to mind while you're talking about this is, and I've experienced this, I'm pretty sure you've experienced this too, is, particularly a good example is Chat GPT. Is like, how do I use Chat, the CEO or whatever is like, I need to use Chat GPT, I need to use large language models or whatever. It's not the same as what you're describing, right? That's like I'm desperately trying to keep up with the times, and I gotta, I've got some board member or investor breathing down my neck to say how are you using AI, ML, or whatever. That's different from the readiness piece.
Yeah, I absolutely. And it's actually funny you bring that up, because that's my article that's going out this morning, that's this week, is about that. I call it Gen AI and the fear of missing out, right? Like this idea that there's people out there who are essentially saying we're not doing enough, like at the far reaches of cutting edge Gen AI or whatever. And I would actually argue that the people who are, when you have a company where people are like, why aren't we doing the really far out stuff, but the issue is that they don't understand that, like, they're not set up to do that, is that that's actually just a really complicated or sort of subtle, maybe not complicated, more subtle form of resistant. Like, we don't waste your time don't waste your time using that calculator.
Doing the steps to get there. Just jump to the third floor.
Right.
Your superpowers or whatever.
It's basically, because the answer to that is change management, right? Not, it's not investing in acceleration. I mean, you can go out and do it, but what you're going to end up with is like the way I said it, and again, I wrote this article about this yesterday. The way I said it in there was, if you are focused on the tool, meaning like say Gen AI, it's a little bit like saying, like, what can I do with this hammer, right? Like
where's something to bang? I want to bang something into a wall.
And the problem is that if you basically say, well, I'm going to use my hammer instead of I'm going to build X, Y, and Z, what tools do I need? What you're going to end up is you're going to end up prioritizing the projects that need a hammer. So you can only do the projects that need a hammer because you're going to focus on a hammer, whatever it is. And what that means is you have now prioritized things that may not be the most important. And so that's not to say, for example, going back to getting out of my world of analogies, and going back to it's not to say that there's no value to Gen AI. Of course there's value to Gen AI, but ultimately ChatGPT, large language models, image generation, all of these things are tools. Yeah. And so the question that you have to really ask is, what are the most important use cases for analytics to be used against? And then figure out which tools and capabilities do we need to develop to deliver on those. Yeah. So that's really how I'll sort of finish out the 4 box here. Is that's really what the top box is. Like, when you're really on all cylinders, it's not just that you have that data maturity and you have this analytical readiness from a technical and people perspective, but you also have built a very clear roadmap that says, these are the biggest, most pressing problems that I have, the data and analytics could potentially help me solve. I'm going to prioritize them and I'm going to focus on them in a logical sequence so that I can move further and further, sort of up that to that upper right-hand corner. And that's when you can really, really start to say things like, oh, are there problems that I have where some of the more cutting edge tools are the best answer? Yeah. That's when I want to start building those capabilities.
So let me ask you a question, and how do you think about this, which is, it is so obvious to people what the cost of doing this. You got to hire new people. You got to buy systems. You got to pay for subscriptions to Snowflake or Amazon, whatever it is. The hidden cost, though, of what happens when you don't do this, like what happens when you don't try to move to that upper corner, is really the sort of the next piece for
Yeah.
me. Is like, and what's your thought? What's the cost of not doing it?
I mean, I think in the end of the day, I mean, I don't know, put a number on it, but I think it's got to be huge. I think ultimately
It's
is.
probably way bigger. Like it's probably a couple orders of magnitude bigger than the cost of
Oh,
doing.
I'm absolutely certain, because ultimately what's happening is you are slowing down decision making. So you and I talked a couple weeks ago about this idea of like, how do you take a problem that was taking 2 weeks, to get the information, and doing it in 2 minutes? If you set up your analytics right so that you can quickly answer in like 2 minutes because you've got the right dashboard or whatever, you can quickly answer an important business question very, very quickly. That's really powerful, not just because you got the answer more quickly, but because you're sitting in a meeting, somebody asks a question, usually because, usually a senior leader or whatever, because
Yeah.
it's an important question to answer, and you answer the question, and then you sort of use that answer to go, okay, well, that wasn't the problem, or that was the problem, and so where do we go next, right?
And I
And
think I might have brought this up the last time we had this conversation of this case where we automated a particular analysis that was taking people like days to do, and then
right,
the win was it only took 2 minutes, so people stopped presenting it. It's like it became clear that it was useless information.
right.
So you got people spinning their wheels is one cost. You have the lack of ability to make the decision with the real information, and then you're doing a lot of sort of guesswork or whatever without the data. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. So there's a couple things there that you just talked about. Number one is, if it takes 2 weeks or whatever to answer a simple question that could take 2 minutes, first of all, you've got a human being who is having to, maybe multiple human beings who actually have to solve this problem for 2 weeks. So what else could they have been doing with their time, right?
Well,
So
and by the way, the software engineer like myself or whatever might also take 2 weeks
right,
to
that's what I
do
mean.
it
Like,
forever.
you've got a finance person and a data engineering person, maybe an analytics person. They're basically taking 2 weeks to answer a question that could have taken 2 minutes. So what else could they have done is the first question. The second question is the information as valuable in 2 weeks as it would have been right now? Because 2 weeks from now, I'm going to have different questions. I've moved on. There's new information. And so I'm now spending time working on a question that may not be valid anymore. And then the last piece is really probably the most likely scenario, which is be like, it's almost like you just don't know. So you basically say, oh, it's going to take 2 weeks to get an answer to this question, so I'm just never going to ask that question again, which doesn't mean that the question wasn't important. It just means I've now given up on asking the question. So I think there's so many different ways that this could really be very, very costly for companies that I believe, I agree with you. Like, it's got to be something like, orders of magnitude more than the cost of the people. But that's not the way it works, as we all know in the corporate world. Is you're often in a situation where you just don't have the heads, you don't have the HR budget, etc. So
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
So that's the data.
It's a great, I think it's a great way to sort of frame the problem, to think about it this way and to kind of put yourself on this. As you said, I think probably a lot of people would probably end up in this ad hoc category. And
Yeah.
I think everybody wants to be higher up, but I do that resistance piece, I think it's probably the case that I find a lot of resistance in doing things in new ways or analytical ways. And there's also this sort of part of the resistance I've seen is if the automated way doesn't work 5 times better than the manual way right out of the gate, then it can't possibly be worthwhile. We should just go back to doing it this old way.
Well, again, that's sort of that change management piece. You often have to train people to to use the new tools and to use them the right way. And when they don't know how to use them, they give up because their immediate reaction is, I'm going to go back to my abacus, or they find
Which is actually interesting why UX is so important, because if it takes 5 steps, you have to remember everything or whatever to do something. 98% of people will stop trying if it takes more than a couple button clicks to do whatever. And so, that gives a little bit more of a boost to the UX folks, of like why that's so important, even when we're talking about internal data access.
Right. Absolutely.
All right, Jeff. I know you got to go pretty soon. We should just keep doing these. I will keep surprising you last minute with live streams. At some point, we'll start advertising so people can watch you react to my, surprising you with a live stream. I don't know how I'm going to make it so that you don't know, but everybody else in the world knows that the live stream.
You're saying you want me to look like I don't know what I'm talking about?
No, you absolutely look like. Well, I mean, look, I'm biased. I think you know what you're talking about. I just think it's fun to see how you'll react to the problem is. All right. Well, have a good rest of your morning, and thanks for chatting.
Yeah, as always.
Right, well,
later.